The 13th Reflection is a realm cursed by chaos, and it's been that way for many years. But before the darkness claimed everyone and everything, there were heroes who fought to save it. Now some died, and others were seduced by the dark forces they tried to seal away, and a few of them are still around, and could play a key part in saving the 13th. Let's explore everything we know about the heroes of the Void and the war that cursed their world. Plus, we'll also speculate about how these characters could have roles to play in future story patches. Be advised, there will be spoilers for patch 6.2. My name is Stout, and I really hope you enjoy. The 13th is one of many reflections of the source. Most of you already know that the shards were created by Hydaelyn in a battle with Zodiark. Both were primals used by warring factions of ancients at the earliest point of history we know in Final Fantasy XIV. This sundering means that these shards operate in their own dimensions. Trouble for the 13th began with the Ascians, dark mages who wanted to rejoin the shards and put Zodiark back at the top of the food chain. One of the Ascians, Emetselch, tells us that the shards can only rejoin when the source and reflection are on the brink of collapse. This is known as a calamity. Igiorum is the Ascian tasked with rejoining the 13th. Emetselch says she was working alone, but we're told servants, plural, are to blame for what happened. He's likely referencing lesser Ascians with black masks who work under the Ascians with red masks. Igiorum and her underlings passed a knowledge of the Eidolons on to the mortal races of the 13th. People from the source know them as primals, mythical creatures summoned by large concentrations of ether. Now, due to the nature of their existence, an Eidolon must consume ether from its surroundings, thus becoming a threat to the world. Once summoned, Eidolons can temper other beings, instilling fanatical loyalty and creating a secure wellspring of faith to sustain them. It's likely most of the Eidolons involved were dark aspected given what happens later. Secondhand stories from that time tell of how the Eidolons threatened the balance of the 13th. The world needed someone to take a stand, and heroes would answer the call. These figures of legend could turn the tide with a special power, the ability to bind ether to crystals, sealing the Eidolons away. People with this gift are called Memoriates. The war between Eidolon and Memoriate is known as the Contra Memoria. We're told that there were a lot of Memoriates at this time, but most worked independently and didn't establish factions to defend the 13th. And so the Eidolons were defeated, locked away in crystals forever. We're told creating these crystals is a permanent process as far as one Memoriate knows, so the world should have been safe from the threat of darkness. But we know that's not the end of this story. Many of the Memoriates who fought so hard to protect their world couldn't resist the dark ether imprisoned in the crystals. Gradually that ether leaked out, in small amounts at first, but it was enough to tempt the Memoriates. They became seduced by the forces that they once fought against. It was enough to begin corrupting the heroes, turning them into savage beasts. This tipped the scales, resulting in the flood of darkness that blanketed the world. All but a few of its inhabitants turned into astral-aspected, ether-starved monstrosities, the voidsent. The strong carved out domains, and weaker voidsent sought to serve. All voidsent want nothing more than to consume ether and become more powerful. As for the Ascians, their plan to rejoin the shard with the source did not work. The 13th was too far gone, so they abandoned their plans for that reflection, and Igiorum had much to prove for her failure. Those are the events that shaped what the 13th is like today. The Ascians gave up, but some are still holding on to hope that the world can be saved. Perhaps some heroes of the 13th could be redeemed, but who are the ones we know about? The most significant hero of the Void is Yunukalhai, a boy blessed with the power of the Echo. Despite his gift, he wasn't strong enough to stop the flood of darkness. It happened when he was just a child, and there were no groups like the Scions of the Source to stand with him. The flood would have corrupted Unukalhai like everyone else, if not for the intervention of Elidibus, one of the Ascians. He plucked the boy from his crumbling world and taught him about the importance of dualism, or the constant balancing of light and darkness. Unukalhai became Elidibus's disciple, vowing to never let another world fall like his did. Some players may have never heard of Yunukalhai, and that's because his moments in the story are optional. The warrior first meets him in the Rising Stones. He claims his master sent him to help the Scions in the coming threat of the Icons, primals summoned during the Third Era. You can watch my videos on the Allegan Empire to learn more about them. The links are in the description. Unukalhai is a boy hero down to the last detail, even if he doesn't see himself in that light. Part of his journey in the Warring Triad story is doubting his abilities and worthiness. Every encounter with the Triad and Regula Van Hydrus of the Garlean Empire sees him trying and failing to help the warrior. The tipping point is when Hydrus makes a heroic sacrifice in the confrontation with the primal Zervan. That doubt builds up further. How can he measure up to the heroes of the Source, the ones who were actually able to avert their world's destruction? But the Scions reassure him that it's his actions now that make him a hero, not his previous failures. Yunukalhai is a big believer in the Warrior of Light and their companions. That's why he does everything in his power to help them. They give him his greatest second chance. Another hero of the Void is Silvia, also known as Cyella and the Shadowkeeper. She's a Memoriate that lost her home when the Flood of Darkness came. Silvia is also one of Hydaelyn's chosen, and can wield the Echo. Like Unukalhai, she was saved at the last second by Ascians. Loghrif and Metron brought her to the First, which resulted in her losing her Memoriate abilities. The Ascians convinced her she could help them, saving the remaining worlds through rejoinings, but they didn't give her the full story. Now an unwitting pawn, Silvia establishes herself as the Shadowkeeper in the First, secretly grooming young adventurers into Warriors of Light. They told her that having a calamity on the First would help the 13th, a flood of light to counter the flood of darkness. The Warriors of the First must die to save her home. Her deception led to Ardbert and the other Warriors of Darkness. They became close friends and fought against the world's evils while gaining their crystals of light. Eventually she reveals her schemes and tries to kill them, but Silvia can't take the Warriors on her own. Ardbert knocks her to the ground. She tries to accept her fate and demands that Ardbert strike her down, but he remembers their bond well, the journey they made together, and so he refuses, as do the other Warriors of Darkness. After being spared, Silvia returns to the Crystarium and abandons her life as an adventurer. She takes up the name Cyella and tells stories of the sacrifices her former friends made. Silvia is an extremist with good intentions and an amazing piece of Shadowbringers lore. You learn her story from completing the role quests in the Crystarium. Speaking of those quests, you should definitely do them because that event and Elidibus's eventual death brings Yunukalhai to the First with Silvia. That's because, like Ardbert's travels to the Source, Unukalhai's unique situation puts him somewhere between life and death. You can talk to them to learn more about their research into restoring the 13th, similar to how the First is now on a road to recovery. It could take years to find a solution, but they are making progress. And both of them have additional dialogue in 6.2, and are actually shocked when you tell them you went to the 13th. They mention that they are going to be meeting soon with the people that managed to revive the Empty. We can assume that's Reen and Gaia. Unfortunately, Yunukalhai declines to join you on your ventures there once you mention who you met on the other side of the Void. He says his presence would be extraneous, though the boy does tell us he will hone his skills for when the time comes that he's needed. Even though he's on the sidelines now, I believe that he and Silvia will come into play in the 13th story down the road. At least I hope they do. Now the guide that Unukalhai mentions is Zero, the enigmatic woman that Xenos enslaved as his voidsent Reaper avatar. She was released back to the 13th when Xenos died at the edge of the universe in Endwalker. The warrior finds her in the dungeons of Troya. That's when the crystal of light that Y'shtola gave the warrior reacts, revealing Zero's true form. At least, it's implied that that's her true form. The avatar has no name, so Y'shtola dubs her Zero, not to show she's empty, but to signify a new beginning for her. Zero serves as our window into the world of the 13th. Now she's only half voidsent. Her mother was one of the heroes of the 13th who fought against the Flood of Darkness. She was infected while pregnant, and so Zero was cast into the rift between worlds when the Flood came. That's how she avoided becoming a full voidsent. Zero is unique for several reasons. She's a Memoria like her mother. She's also similar to voidsent from the first. Both are beings born in a world overwhelmed by a specific aspect, making them human hybrids. They each have two forms, an attractive one and a hideous one. And like how voidsent commands the Sin Eaters, Zero can condemn the voidsent by sealing them in crystals. Zero educates us on how voidsent consume ether and what it does to the soul. Essences become blended, beings become diluted, and will change depending on the ether soul they eat. Consuming too much will twist the original soul into something different. This could tie into how much of Zero's memory is fuzzy. We'll come back to this in a bit. Zero is stoic, distant, and fully buys into the culture of voidsent, working as transactional beings. If you want her help, you pay up. But if you do her a favor, she's in your debt. But she's not without emotion. We see how she allows weaker, outcast voidsent to stay in her domain. She even cares about some of their well-being, though she pretends not to. Zero isn't like other strong voidsent. She doesn't care about having power or minions to do her bidding. On the flip side, she also tells us she doesn't care about the 13th and has no desire to save it. But no matter what she says, Zero's fate is tied to the Warrior of Light. Naoki Yoshida, the game's director, has said that Xenos chose her as his avatar for a good reason. Perhaps she's a shard of Azum like the player, but we are led to believe she's the last of her kind, the last Memoria. Well, maybe. Let's irresponsibly speculate for a moment on the Knight in Black. Golbez is another character from the 13th shrouded in mystery. It's implied he's the most powerful force in the 13th and commands the largest faction. Unlike everyone else the warrior encounters in the 13th, Golbez may not be a voidsent at all. No one refers to him by that term, instead using man or knight. But only a few instances of dialogue have voidsent use that word, so maybe this is a reach. We also haven't seen him consume ether of other beings like voidsent, though some dialogue in Zero's domain suggests that he does. It's also likely that Golbez is one of Hydaelyn's chosen. There's a line in the English script that says, "What irony that the blessed damned should set us free." But if you consult with the Japanese script, he says something a little bit different. Quote, "Away with you, cursing the fate of being struck down by one who received the blessing." Shoutouts to Anonymous for sharing this with me. But regardless of what Golbez truly is, the weaker voidsent tell us he's amassing great amounts of ether for something big. Rubicante of the Four Archfiends says he's willing to die to pave a path for all. Golbez speaks of his dream, ambition, the looming war. We're also shown a flashback of Golbez swinging his sword at a robed figure. I speculate on this and much more in my Golbez video. You should go check that out. But why am I talking about Golbez here? There's clues that he has connections with Zero. Every voidsent the warrior talks to in the 13th knows of Golbez, but not Zero. She says she's never heard the name. Has she really been in the source long enough for Golbez to rise to power? In my opinion, that's very unlikely. I believe there's more to their relationship that could tie into the theme of buried memory, the name of the 6.2 story chapter. Golbez also doesn't seem shaken by the revelation that a Memoriat has emerged. In fact, this seems to bolster his resolve. Perhaps Golbez is a Memoriat too. We don't know enough to make a specific prediction about his connection with Zero, but I'm confident we'll get something in a future story patch. The side quest Shadowed Past becomes available after you finish the main story quest for 6.2. You can pick it up in Radz-at-Han, and I highly recommend you do. It's here we learn about how two of the four Archfiends became who they are today. One of these stories gives us a glimpse of someone labeled the Madden Memoriat. He was on his way to a garrison, needing help against the Eidolons, but the Memoriat arrived too late. They had almost given up hope when they heard groaning beneath the rubble. A man survived, but not by a stroke of luck. He hid like a coward. The man tried to justify his actions by saying his death would not serve his nation, but the Madden Memoriate is furious. He quickly attacks, knocking the man out and buries him alive. That's the last we've seen of the Madden Memoriate for now, and in my opinion, it's probably going to stay that way. If he was significant, I feel like they would have actually given us a name for this character, but I've been wrong before. These are the heroes and survivors of the Void. I think it's clear the 13th can and will be redeemed. So which of these characters do you hope will play a big part in that? Talk to me in the comments. I love discussing the lore with you guys. Also, we are so close to 10,000 subscribers. So if you like Final Fantasy XIV lore, consider subscribing so you know when new videos come out. Take care, warriors, and I'll see you next time.